Okay, so I have an agenda which I'm probably not following. So we're going to worry about that. So I stole this thing from one of our other presentations. And the first question I have is, well, what do you think waterfall is? Before we talk about Wagile, does anybody actually know what waterfall is? You can go ahead and put an answer in the chat and tell me what you think it actually is. How the heck do I get rid of this thing here?
Okay, so we've got a Godwin with the obvious answer, water that's falling. And then I is just simply repeating what Godwin said.
Oh, you guys are on the wall.
Yeah. Philip says it's an old school project management practice. Michael's, it's an incremental project process. Isaac, absolutely, with the archaeology, he says it's an antique methodology. And Ricardo says it's monitoring and controlling. I don't know what we're monitoring here, but I'm certainly not sure that we're in control, Art.
No, not in control at all.
Yeah, and Bob, hey, I think you got the win. He says it's a pain in the you-know-what.
Well, it's very interesting. So what I did is I decided to take advantage of tonight, and I'm going to throw in some things with a little bit of bragging and a little bit of broadening of the horizon about what it is that we're talking about. But first, we'll talk about what is waterfall. So this thing was started, well, it wasn't a big deal, right? This guy Royce wrote a paper. That's the whole origin of waterfall. There wasn't a book, and there wasn't this professor from Harvard coming in and telling everybody, we got to change the way we're working, right? They just wrote a paper. Right? And he said, there is such a thing. This is a good way to develop software. And there's a waterfall process. And there are logical progression of steps.
Hey, Ted, come up here.
DLC, right? Now, somebody had the right idea when they said it's a project management approach, because it is. That's actually the way it's defined. And you go through these stages and steps, and you move towards the ultimate release. This is actually what they described as the waterfall method. So many of you might have been following this and may never have actually seen this. And it starts with, spending 6 months gathering requirements, right? Now you got all these business requirements. And as we know from Agile experience, we missed some. We didn't quite get it right. And we know the customer is not going to be happy when we're done. Then you go through a design phase. And before we actually even had web or cell phones, you still had a design. And by the way, you didn't just design it, right? But you had to go through the logical and the physical design. And each one of those was a separate toll gate. And then you went through the implementation, then the verification, which includes like all the testing and stuff. And then you go into maintenance. So this was the idea. So it actually was a process. It's a project methodology, and it's a process that you would follow. So I'll show you back in, okay, so I did this back in 1999, and we ran it starting in around 2000. So when I was at IBM, I made pictures of these things, so you can't edit them. I invented some roles. I said on the business side, there's a project lead, and he owns everything end to end, including user adoption, from the idea through user adoption. And he partners with development, where they're going to be doing all of that technical work. And actually what happens is the role of the business gets smaller as you go through the process. Technology takes a bigger role. And as you can see, the way a waterfall process would work is you would have reviews. There'd be an ARC review. By the way, there wasn't just an ARC review, but there was a portfolio review. Are we going to fund this thing? Right? Does it fit within our strategy? How about we bring in the other business areas and talk to them about, does it fit within their strategy? And is everybody going to buy in on this thing? Because we're going to go spend a lot of money and then we got to maintain it. And then you define it. So you come up with the idea. Now you're going to go through another ARC review and you're going to go through another portfolio review. So these are all these toll gates you would go through. Then you go through one for your design phase, right? Now you go through develop test. Then you go through putting it out to the customer, and then you go into operations. And this is a waterfall process. Now, a small project, you could get this done within what was then a short amount of time, maybe 6 months. A long project could take multiple years. So then I looked at this and I said, so what do you think SAFE is? Does anybody want to chime in and tell me what they think SAFE is? Or put it in the chat. Or I'll lecture all night.
Yeah, don't be shy, folks.
Don't be shy. Come on, people. You know us.
Okay. According to it's a place to store money.
All right. We got to capture that.
First, we have to have money, right, Art?
Yes, you need money.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Gilson said he's not familiar with it.
SAFE. So can you elaborate what SAFE is? I don't really know what SAFE is.
Good question. Okay, so let me help you out there. So what SAFE did, I'm going to show you a simplified version of what SAFE is. That's something that I created back then. So this was from 20 years ago. It just gives you an idea how old I am. So the concept of SAFE is this in a very complicated, very intense IT governance, IT management methodology and process and framework that has embedded in it Agile, Scrum, and portfolio teams. The idea is that up on top, the top level is somebody reviewing things in order to determine whether or not they're going to invest in it. And at the top level, you're figuring out, am I going to put in money for this big thing that's going to be a change? And you're going through an investment board, and that's a high level executive board. And they're looking at it across the company. The next level would be a portfolio team. And the portfolio team is going to be looking at it from within a particular business area. And they're going to be taking a look at this investment and saying, does this investment sit within not only the priorities of the business, but our IT strategy? And is it going to fit with anything else? Are we going to build it? Are we going to buy it? Can we integrate it? Can we sunset other stuff? Let's look at it, the whole enchilada on a portfolio level. And if they decide to fund it, then these are the guys who are doing these checkpoints on a regular basis at each one of these phases. And depending upon the company you're in, there may even be more checkpoints. These checkpoints over here on the development side are actually simplified because you might go through a legal review, you might go through accessibility, you might go through a web standards review, you might go through lower level application architecture and infrastructure architectural reviews. You might go through separate UAT, performance testing. All of these things done by other people in a sequential process. So when we talk about waterfall, we have to first define where is it that we want to focus. all processes, all frameworks have the top layer and have the second layer. Every company is making a decision on the enterprise level about its investments. Every company has a business area that's got a budget and they're making funding decisions as well. So that part, in a sense, is waterfall. It's done sequentially. If we're agile, we're not doing it once a year. We try to move away from once a year into doing this on a regular basis. If we're really good at portfolio, we're doing this thing on a monthly basis, right? You're managing your budget on a monthly basis. So that's all part of what I see as waterfall. What we talk about the most is down over here on the team level, where we talk about, we're familiar with Scrum and Kanban, and how are the teams operating, and how are the teams developing and delivering, which is where we focus about Agile. How we defining what it is that the features are for our products. So that's where we focus on in terms of Agile. And when they talk about Agile, they're really talking about that area. So when you're looking at that stuff, what's interesting is in this waterfall model, so this first part here, under what I called concept, and what I'll show you here is it wasn't just, what this was also a framework. So within this framework, one methodology had different checkpoints, micro design, and it's never this clean, right? Micro design would be finished somewhere in the middle of while people are developing. You're still doing your micro design, and you're doing your traceability matrix and stuff in here. RUP is rational unified process, and so it's an incremental delivery process rather than iterative. So it's kind of agile. What they said is that they had these different phases, still toll gates. And then, but there's construction where you're doing your developing and testing is all part of the same work. Ascendant is actually, that's the SAP methodology. Even more checkpoints. So the idea of waterfall was pretty pervasive throughout the world in terms of how we went ahead and made decisions. Today, when you look at things like SAFe, when you look at any scaled agile system, you're still going to make a funding decision on an initiative. The difference between agile and waterfall in this is that in agile, we want you to fund maybe a product or a value stream, right? Something that delivers value end to end. Give me a budget for the year. Give me the money. Let me form some permanent teams and let me go and do my stuff. So in Agile, we want to chop it off right back over here, even actually before initiatives. In project world, because most companies, bigger companies, still have projects. And so they're going to say, you better give me an initiative that we can define so I can fund your initiative. The initiative may have any number of projects under it. Again, if you're good with Agile, you might get some funding for multiple projects at this level, or at least you'll get funding for a value stream. The idea is to fund your permanent teams. Now, what happens is now you get into this phase over here where I'm taking these ideas and I'm breaking them down. Think of this as I got my initiatives, now I'm creating my epics. So again, when I'm creating epics, when you look at SAFe, there's a step. First, you create your epic before you go ahead and define your features. So is that waterfall or Agile? Well, It's a matter of opinion. But the concept is there. You're still doing some kind of a lightweight business case. In the SAFe framework, you're doing a lightweight business case. In other scaled frameworks, you're also doing something light. So back over here, what we would do is we would do this huge business case. We'd go to finance, and finance would go test it. You'd have to prove it. You'd have to go out and get business units to validate it and say, yeah, we're going to save that kind of money. We're going to generate revenue. In Agile, we're saying, create one page, create your elevator pitch. Am I going to buy it or not? So where I want to go with this is it's not just about the process. It's about the mindset. And what's hard is to, even looking at a waterfall type process, change the mindset and then be agile within that framework. And as I thought about it, that was the key message that I wanted to come away with, is think in terms of agile values rather than these processes. And I'll show you more slides. We'll have some fun. But you can see how this could be, well, if I got my epics over here, and then I'm going to do my features over here. Now I'm going to come down to the teams. This is where Scrum starts, if you think about it. So, and this was a lot of fun. I used to sell this. So let's go back to what is Agile, right? We talked about what is waterfall. So what's Agile? So anybody who's been involved in Agile has seen an umbrella slide. I customized mine because I wanted to play with some of it. So on the left are what I think of as frameworks. And on the right, what I think of is methodologies, things that you would do in order to be agile. And by the way, DevOps is a framework. But DevOps is on both sides, actually, if I wanted to do this right. So when we look at Agile, you take a step back and you say, well, Scrum, we know what that's about, right? I got a product owner, I got a Scrum Master, I got a team. We're gonna take this backlog of features and stories, and we're gonna work those. So that's from what was the develop phase. So what's different? What's different between Agile and Waterfall, right? In Scrum, there are particular differences because what we want to do is we want to deliver every 2 weeks. So the process is actually the same. It's the way we execute it that's changed. We don't need all of those requirements up front. We're going to take an MVP. We're going to take something that we think we can deliver in value, and we're going to work on delivering that small thing and test it with the customer to see if they like it. Now in Waterfall, there was something similar. We would work with wireframes, we'd work with mock-ups, we'd work with prototype tools, and this would all be done up in concept and plan, but taking months. And trust me, it didn't work because I was part of a red team investigating why it is we blew $3 million on a project. It didn't satisfy the customer. And the answer was because we talked to the customer, but we forgot to talk to their technical team. So you do all of this work and you get all of these experts and you just miss one thing and you're in trouble. So, and when you look at the rest of the frameworks, Kanban, less DevOps, really talk a lot about moving up and down the stream. So when you look at this picture, instead of it all being horizontal like the other pictures, the team down over here in the development phase is working up here, right? So I was a little ahead of my time. What I said is that the teams themselves were involved in deciding what it was that they were going to build. This was 20 years ago. And the teams would be participating and talking to the business about what makes the most sense. And let's narrow down what it is that we're going to do. And then let's focus down on putting something out. But the idea is to have that team working up the stack, working up the management stack, working back to the customer. So in Agile, these frameworks talk about that. SAFe, when you do it right, could also be done that way, because SAFe talks about BDD. And if you do BDD right, not just from the team side, but up on the design phase and up on the strategy side, you get the team involved. Now I'm taking a waterfall process, but I'm executing it in an Agile way. Oh, okay. All right, I didn't put this one in the right place. So I'm going to come back to this slide. So back in 2007, I created something that I think is Agile, because the company wasn't ready to let go of waterfall, but we wanted to roll out Agile. So how the heck do we do this? This I could tell you was not easy. And so I had to start capturing metrics on which teams used which form of Agile and how well did they do? How quickly did they deliver? You know, looking at the lead time, how long from the customer requirement until it's actually delivered? And then compare them to show the value and benefit of Agile. So we wanted to do large projects in Agile, but they said, wait a minute, it's too much money. You're talking about $500,000 to sky's the limit. So for these kind of things, we still had to have an architecture review because we weren't on the cloud, right? Then I go through my definition phase and I create my architecture descriptions. Over here, I have a general idea. Now I'm coming down over here and I'm saying, wait a minute, I'm buying this piece of software and I got to build an infrastructure for it. Well, you know, Agile infrastructure is not easy. And back then we didn't know how to do it. And you'd go through a design phase, but then your Scrum teams would do develop, test, deploy on their own. Once I got my features and I had my architectural design, the team could go ahead and deploy as often as they wanted. So that was my idea of a Agile approach. I had to go through the toll gates, but I can do Scrum. Then I said, wait a minute, what if I got a project that I think doesn't have heavy architecture? The way I got this pulled off was I had them assign an architect to every team. And so instead of having to go through an arch review all the time, you had somebody to talk to. And he'd say, you know what, this is really complicating. I got some firewall issues. We got some major integration issues over here. You want to bring in third-party software? That's not in our strategy. We got to have a talk, right? But the idea was, you know what? I got my money. I know what I'm going to do. I got them to understand the three legs of the tool, and allowing my money was going to be fixed. And the time for the project would be fixed, and your scope was variable. And you can go ahead and work your high priority requirements as you saw fit. That's also a form of Agile, because you still have to go through this piece here. So that's a while back. Now I'm going to go back to this. So now what happens is, all right, you're out there in the real world. Where does Agile happen? Where does it come from? How does this occur? And actually it occurs from me looking into the internet, using Google a lot. It can happen from two directions. It can happen because I'm in a company and the company wants to go Agile, but they're not quite ready. So they want to adopt some Agile practices, but they don't want to give up the control. So that's going to be one way you end up with Agile. Another way is they start embracing Agile and they move away from waterfall, and then it doesn't work. And they start falling back to the waterfall practices. Either way, you end up with Agile. Although I was calling it Waggle for a long time. Right. So I found this stuff over here which said, well, how do you know that you're doing Waggle? What are some of the characteristics? And if you want to have some fun, I like to have fun. We could make this a little bit interactive. And if we looked at these things one at a time, like let's say that you're finding that there are kickoff meetings. Do you think that's a characteristic of waterfall and Agile together? What would be different? What would happen in Agile? You have to come off mute to talk, people.
Hey, we got Bill, who's sharing in the chat, Art, management not seeing or believing that enough progress is being made. That's in response to your statement about, things, folks starting off and then kind of backsliding.
Good point, Bill.
Any other observations from these characteristics, which, by the way, Art, I've seen and felt most of these. Okay. We've got Andrea saying, hey, a daily scrum versus a kickoff. That's an interesting observation.
So we don't do kickoff and waterfall and Agile, right?
No, there's no kickoff meeting.
Okay.
See, you do kickoff meetings when you kick off a project.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What we want to do, one of the hard things that you need to do on a portfolio level in a company is move away from the idea that you're managing projects. And this goes back to my view of the problem of how we manage IT. At least we were, hopefully we're moving away. Some companies are way behind. But what would happen is there'd be a budget for all of your operating. This is my IT operating cost. It's this big, huge piece of change over here, and I have no idea what makes it up. So all I can control are my new initiatives. And so you take this, 5% of your budget and you fight over it. If you start going back to thinking about what does my value stream cost? What does it cost me to deliver value to a customer? What does it cost me to manage a suite of applications that deliver some functionality, some consistent functionality? And let me manage that cost and then make a decision for the company. Should I invest in that thing? Which means that I now have to understand what it costs me to manage it and operate it and run it. And within that budget, I can find ways with a little bit of extra to go ahead and then fund new things. And if I manage it that way, I can make intelligent decisions. But as long as you're still running projects, you're just fighting over this 5% of the budget, maybe 6%. So that's why I that's when I look at projects, that's the biggest issue I see.
Hey, Art, Andrea's got a great question she posed in the chat. I don't know if this is the right time, but maybe.
Anytime.
She asked, is there a contingency or management reserves in Agile?
So that's a really good question. The idea is that you get a bucket of money for some value proposition, value stream, right? Or process you're managing. And it's up to you how you manage that bucket of money, right? You're doing new stuff, you're doing operations work. Now, I can keep a reserve because I'm looking at my priorities, and that's one way to do it, and I can save some money. One of the things we did was we had the CIO had his own reserve bucket of money, and anybody came in with a really great idea, the CIO directly would fund it. If you have a director, they can keep a little bucket of money for the same kind of thing. Typically in Agile, what you're doing is new things come in and you're really prioritizing and say, is that more important or less important than something I'm doing right now? So that there's always a trade-off, right? You're spending plenty of money on IT. The question is, I want to do something new. Do I need more money, or can I find a way to do it with the money I got?
Mm-hmm. Cool.
See,
yeah, we've also got a question from Joanne. I don't know if that helped Andrea or not. She could pose another question if she does. Joanne posed a question: Is there a concept of a hypercare team in any of this?
A hypercare? Explain.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by hypercare, Joanne?
Well, I'm having this experience. I thought when you're a Scrum Master, you're coordinating between the team. It looks like, well, from my experience, it's like not only I'm acting as a release manager, but I'm also putting an hypercare team together. But I thought doing Agile, the Scrum Master do not do such. So is that I know in project management, we do that, but in Agile, do we do stuff like that?
A really good question. I can throw this out to the other coaches and see if they got opinions before I pipe my 2 cents in.
You're not going to get off that easy, Art.
Oh, shit. Okay. So what I see is that roles and responsibilities as we roll out Agile is a challenge in companies. The problem is that they don't really define it clearly. And so what happens is it comes down to who's the stronger person, and they dump on that person, right? We all know in work, whoever does the most work will get more work. That's generally a rule of thumb. So if you're a good Scrum Master and you're producing things, so if you're in a safe environment, there would be something called a release train engineer. In some environments, they have the product owner is responsible for delivery. Or there's a delivery manager responsible for delivery. There's usually some kind of manager responsible for this stuff. But if they don't have that, then it ends up in the Scrum Master, because they're coming down to the Scrum Master and saying, hey, it's your team. What are you doing to solve the problems? The best thing as a Scrum Master, what you can do is you work with your team to take these things on as team responsibilities. So it's not just all on your shoulders. What do you think, Joanne? Would that work?
Yeah, that works. Yes, thank you. That was
Cool.
a good.
Awesome. Yeah. So we had a question from Alfredo. that maybe will need a little bit more clarification, but he was asking, is there a problem that we are managing projects versus programs? And then I guess he said, project design the next Mustang for 2022.
Yeah, I can, maybe
go for it, Alfredo. Go, you can talk. Go for it.
Sure. So I've struggled with waterfall until I started to look at things more like at a program. Sometimes we tend to have this fascination with just defining a project. And obviously there's a lot of pressure and you want to figure everything out and then execute. And then sometimes you have way too many things. And realistically, like I can think of software, you don't do one program, you do version 1, let's say, and then version 2. And it's not ending. You're going to have that program for a lifetime, a reasonable lifetime that you can foresee. And I think this overemphasis on this, just getting this one thing out, kind of short circuits, and it makes it more difficult for people to do things that are more sustainable over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean, if you thought about that as instead of version 1 and version 2, think about, I'm just working with the business to find out what's most important, right? What's the next thing that will make it really valuable to them? And if you thought in terms of version 1 and version 2, you've got this, typically what's happening there is some project managers making a commitment to the business. Yeah, you get version 2 in 9 months and 3 days. But you really don't, so what happens is, remember, your scope is variable. So that's where you really want to keep an eye on delivering the most important thing rather than trying to box yourself into some kind of a version. What you're looking at is delivering more and more features and capabilities. And it's iterative, it keeps growing until there's a point in time where you say that, you know, shouldn't I be spending my money on something else? I mean, isn't it good enough? They're living with it, they're selling, it's working. You know, how much more money want I put into this when I can do something new and build some mobile app?
Hey, Art,
Yeah.
it's Bill. You know, I've been in IT probably as long as you.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so am I. It's been a fun journey, but you know, I think back with projects and waterfall and how and why maybe some of it came around and stuck around so long. And I know when I was starting, especially earlier on in the career, computer time was expensive. Computer access was expensive. And in order to, and then if you want to get into developing cards, Hollerith cards and doing that kind of coding, just the time to do it was expensive. So a very structured approach made a lot of sense for the time. And now that everything's gotten cheaper and everything's gotten a lot quicker and easier and faster to develop, the transition definitely makes a lot of sense. But you know, since you worked for IBM too, you have any examples of what, you know, operating systems and time on the computer cost back then?
Oh God. So that kind of stuff was a little before even my time. And the consideration wasn't the time. The big consideration that I saw were two things, three things maybe. But one of them was the systems we put in place had to do with making sure that not every part of the business was building the same thing or building things that were on different technologies. So some company would go out and say, you know what, we're going to buy this CRM application. It's going to cost us about $4 or $5 million. But by the way, it doesn't work on IBM servers, and we got to buy these servers from some other company. So you had to try and stop that happening. It didn't always stop, by the way, because it depends on the power of the executive. So you had to have these kind of toll gates to stop people from doing that kind of stuff. You know, people would build things that um, we're never going to actually meet performance standards. And so, we had to put in some things where before, if you're going to build something big, before you get to doing performance testing, we could do performance profiling, using software. So the toll gates and the checks up front made sense because there were things you could do from a business perspective. So you're right, Bill, it was a different world. And as we moved to the cloud, one of the things the architects would come in and then say is, wait a minute, why the heck are we buying servers? You're coming in and you got this huge budget for buying servers and putting them in. Why aren't we building this thing on a cloud? Now, of course, it was IBM. We tried to build a cloud. It didn't work. They just couldn't do it back then. We had to go buy somebody. But that was the concept, right? Once we bought somebody, hey, can't we run it on the cloud? Can we automate deployment? So architects would always have a big role to play in that decision making up front. So you're on the right track. It had to do with money, maybe not so much the operating. Later on, we got into, because we didn't understand operating costs until later on when we actually started putting did a whole piece of work. We actually mapped every application to a process and a process owner and a sub process. And we could then, based on the systems that we built, we could see how much money that it costs for every application and every process. And then we could say, if I've got this process and it costs me this amount of money, how much is my return on that entire process, entire business process? What am I spending on customer relationship management? What am I spending on HR management? What am I spending on real estate? And it's great information. Yeah, questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Hey, Rick.
Good afternoon. So, like a car that's going around in a track, in a circle, in a circle, in a circle, do I stay on this track, or is there ever a reason for me to veer off and find a better way to do this? What causes me to want to stay on this track versus saying I need to jump off and do something better?
Customer sat. That's my simple answer.
Okay. So I had waterfall. I'm assuming I had bad customer sat. I went to this hybrid approach because I didn't want to destroy my culture. I must have improved something, but eventually I need to accept the fact that I need to do a better job. I need to be more flexible and able to react to things a little differently. And that's how I get off this little circle track.
Yeah, what you're looking at is, because what would happen is you would do these customer sat surveys, right? Before NPS, you would do customer sat surveys, and they'd come back and they'd tell you, yeah, our sat rating is 72% and 85% is acceptable. So let's go and do this big thing and capture all of the things that everybody thinks would be great to have. And then we'll do an analysis of it, and then we'll create a project. And then a year later, we might improve a couple of things. And that's not moving your customer sat number. So you start moving to Agile and you start finding ways to deliver change faster. And the customer sat number goes up, not just because you're delivering things that the customer wants, but because you're showing you're responsive to their needs and you're listening to them.
I'd be curious for the people on the phone who work in an environment where this is familiar to them. Why do you want to stay working in that kind of an environment?
Oh, that may be the wrong question, because people stay in environments to make money. They like their job.
Excluding the fact that you have to pay the rent. What's your motivation for wanting to continue in this hybrid approach?
Familiarity.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe the question is, why does the company keep doing it, and what can you do about it?
True. True. The reason for the motivation for the question was, at some point, people have to say, "Hey, I don't want to continue doing this," and then say, "I want to go somewhere else
So,
where I would feel more comfortable or happier or something." Go, Art.
so let's go back to our coaching roots and ask the question: if you're in a company where you're experiencing this, how does it make you feel?
Terrible.
Tell me more.
It's frustrating, right? So you've got it builds a sort of an insecurity about what you're going to be working on next. Are they going to take your team and is your team going to be there or not? Are you going to which direction should you go in? I mean, it's extremely confusing, and the reason why people stay is fear, really fear of the unknown, especially in this day and age with this pandemic. It's just fear. Am I going to be able to get another job or not? Do I just stay here and suck it up and hope for the best and, expect the worst? No, I mean, it's for me personally, it's fear. That's what keeps me there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Alden.
Yeah, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that.
Anybody else want to talk? It's a Wednesday night meeting. It's not a lecture.
Yeah, so I's got a question. Is it a lack of intelligence, I guess, in relation to why do they stick around? Saba mentions don't rock the boat. I don't know if that's a form of fear or not.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go take a break for a minute, and I'm going to let you guys talk amongst yourselves. All right, let's try that.
And you know what you've just done, Art? I think this is actually a first. I mean, I actually think this is the first time that any one of our speakers has just simply said, you know what, I'm going to let you guys talk amongst yourselves. So that's a pretty brave thing.
I believe that was a mic drop.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, that is definitely a mic drop.
Yeah. I hear I saying and not understanding what is the contrary. I guess what is the alternative. Olu says maybe that's the only way they know. That's a pretty interesting observation. Victoria says, yeah, well, the fact that they have a job is a blessing, and so maybe they cherish that. And then oh yes, definitely, Saba. Art definitely has a reason for everything he does. I guarantee you.
Yeah, it's psychological safety and fear. It's a whole lot that contributes to us staying, especially with what's going on, like the last speaker spoke about. But fear sometimes also translates to what you actually, the fear of also, if I go out there, would I get something better than this, or am I still going to be in the same boat? That's another one where it translates to also.
Yeah, but I would think it would be different, and I apologize that I didn't remember the lady's name who spoke candidly.
Yeah.
It's going to be different for her than Art, the second line manager.
Sure.
The second line manager doesn't really have the fear of finding a job because they're at a level where they're not frustrated. People at the bottom are frustrated. The people at the second level are less frustrated, if frustrated at all, because this is familiar territory for them, I would think. This is their norm.
I would disagree with that.
Can I comment on that? Can I comment on that? Because I don't necessarily agree that people at higher levels wouldn't be frustrated. I think if you're a good leader and you care about your people and you want to do the better thing for the business and the people. I mean, and maybe you see the forces that you're having to come up against, and maybe the question ought to be is what can you do to change that? And there's things that you can do, but I wouldn't say that people at a higher level wouldn't be as frustrated. They may see things, people that at different levels see things, they may see things that other people don't see.
I'm gonna
And they're probably equally as frustrated.
I have
Yeah.
to agree with Alfredo. It really depends on the point of view of each individual. I don't think it's a matter of what your role or position is.
Yeah.
You have to go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's
Marcelo.
okay, because I was just going to piggyback on top of both of you and pose a question back to the group is, do you think fear is a factor in the decision making of senior executives?
Oh, definitely.
I think it goes both ways.
Without a question.
Without a question, yeah, it goes both ways. Because fear of actually making things worse than they were before.
Okay, so
Then the fear of alienating your other people below you. It's also a common fear as well.
So do you? So I'm gonna dig into it even further. Do you think it is a bigger factor for them than the individual working inside of a team?
I think it's more for them because they have a whole lot to they're carrying. I mean, they have the whole organization behind them. So I feel, well, those of us in the middle might not actually, those in the front might not actually see that fear because we are also scared of how we're going to pay our bills. But they are holistically looking at the whole organization.
Right. So Saba shared with us in the chat saying execs have more to lose. So does the fact that scale is a factor, okay, a bigger motivator, or is it just a motivator? Or is it just a motivator? I mean, in other words, what I'm getting at is when an organization, looks at the way that they've done things a certain way, and they try to grasp around their heads what it might take to try a different way. Okay, is it any different than any individual on any team looking at the scope of what they've done it this way, and now we want to think about doing it that way? Is it really any different when you talk about the individual themselves? That's the question.
If you just put it to the individual, no, there is no difference. If you just focus on the individual, not their teams, not what they manage or participate in, if you focus on the individual.
Exactly. And let me ask you this. If you look at what the Agile Manifesto says, it starts with individuals and interactions. But before you get to that S at the end of individuals, you've got the individual. So I want to give you that little thought. It starts with the person, and then it just grows. Okay?
Yeah, that's a major issue just with everything in life, right? When you start to look at people as individuals, then that changes your whole perspective. When we don't talk about them, when you're talking about them, it's easy to be against them. They had them. But when you start to talk about people and see people as individuals, that changes the perspective. I agree.
Yeah.
Saba said something that was interesting. She said fear. So, Saba, when you said fear, are you suggesting that someone 2 levels up is fearful of making a change for how it might come out and hence just wants to stay on the circular track? Proving my previous comment, which is they don't want to change.
Actually, it was Olga that says that. However, everybody's fears are justified without a doubt. And when I think about the executives, though, I mean, sometimes taking a big risk like this could make or break your company. And so, we can't really underestimate that. It's fine to kind of give your people the space and freedom and flexibility to put them first, right? But if they're not held accountable, if they don't hold themselves accountable, or if the team doesn't hold them accountable, it all kind of like fizzles out. And then the business starts having like little cracks here and there.
So does the dike need to break before somebody 2 levels up says, we got to change these things?
Yeah.
Do we have to have a flood?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. If the person has fear, they're not going to be very change-like. What is it going to take for them to then want to say, let's change how we do business?
It depends on their tolerance of fear and how willing they are to actually take
Starts at
that
the
risk.
top, right? So
Fine,
if
they
you
can
have
go.
to have the buy-in from the head of the fish. If the head of the fish thinks, the rest of the body is not going to be much good. So if you have your CEO, you know, asking for change and wanting change, and I tell you guys because my company is going through a major transformation, and it's a 2 steps forward, 4 steps back thing that's going on, because you talk a lot about what you want, you know, it sounds great, everyone's motivated, and then all of a sudden something happens and you're right back where you used to be, or you don't see anything happening. Nothing's changing really. We're talking a lot about change. Yeah, some superficial things are changing. You know, now we got a new logo and everybody's yay. But then, you know, you see the behaviors are still the same. And, you know, a big component of that, you can have your C-level management all aligned on, you know, hurrah, you know, pro agile, pro support and pro the employee. But then you've got that middle layer of managers that really need to be on board unanimously and supporting. I mean, I can go to my CIO and have a conversation with him about why my manager's, you know, a jerk or not treating me well and whatnot, and he'll look into it. But, you know, think about everybody that's underneath them and multiply me by 1 million people, because there's a ton of us there. You know, he can't pay attention to each and every single one. So you've got to have that middle layer also on board, and also, you know, find a way to monitor them and make sure that people are, you know, they're doing a lot of surveys in our company, and they're constantly polling us to see how we feel about, you know, our management, the people that are our direct reports, all of that stuff. So that is direct feedback that they get from us, and they make policy and they make changes and they pivot based on that input from us. And that's the one saving grace, I think, here.
That's an awesome place to work.
Yeah, that is awesome. And Olga, you're saying this stuff, and I'm saying, why weren't you here last Saturday? Because we were actually talking in one of the Agile Coaching Clinic groups about that very subject. I was texting Art in the background saying, "Hey, this sounds very familiar to me." So I'm gonna extend an invitation to you to come back on Saturday, okay, and join us and share some more of that. And by the way, this is open to everybody, obviously, okay? Because what you've pointed out is one of the things that folks like Art, myself, Rick, Ray have encountered in these things called agile transformations. And I'm sure that all of you have encountered this sort of stuff where, yeah, you might have some C-levels that they've kind of overcome their initial fears, and the teams have kind of overcome their initial fears, but then you get to this frozen middle layer. And it's kind of like you're treading through Antarctica with a shovel, you know, and it's not a big shovel at that.
But again, investing in leadership and making sure that they're on board. And yes, middle management is the last thread of that engagement. To me, it's still a lot more than a lot of other companies out there. Olga, if you know what happened 4 years ago to what's happening today, it's like complete turnaround, which is amazing. But it's not contributed to the coaches; it's contributed to the people that were there making the you know, like yourself and all these other people that stood up and made a difference. So I think it's a wonderful story, but we need to finish that last leg there. That's the toughest part that we're trying to figure out. You know,
Yes.
and that is
Yeah.
the topic of the day right now is how do you measure middle management, right? We measure teams, we measure performance, we do all this stuff, great for team and all that stuff, but no one's ever looking at that layer and saying, you know, what do we do? How do we make sure that they're also improving and engaged?
Right.
Yeah, Thomas was sharing in the chat that said that the culture is often like family. It's not easy to change. It's not easy to evolve, you know. And you know, I kind of you sparked something in my head, Thomas. Who when you look at a family, you know, when you've got multiple, I'm sorry to use the family metaphor. You got multiple children. You know, there's a stereotype, right? Who are the problem children? The middle children. Just saying. Okay, I'm just saying.
Wait, I'm a middle
Get
child.
away with everything. Yeah, the young ones get away with everything. The oldest, they're the oldest, but the middle ones, they're always the one that, hey, how come you blank?
No, I
Just saying.
totally disagree. I disagree with Marcelo on that one.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a child of the middle of 15, so I have 7 above me and 7 below me.
Wow.
And I'm not the problem child at all.
Because you think you're not the problem.
That is fantastic.
You are the problem.
Help break that cycle. Help break that cycle, Andrea. That's awesome.
So one of the things that I'm challenged with is that sometimes you find success, even at all the layers of organizations. You've done something a certain way and it's actually helped you in your career. And now you're asking me to change, and now you're asking me to look at something differently and try to be more coach-like. You know, that's an uncomfortable feeling. You know, where's all my skills, all this knowledge, and now you want me to just work on the soft skills. I feel like you're taking away from me. So we have to be empathetic to those, you know, management layer, because we're asking a lot from them to try to figure this out. And some of them are not trained. They've never received any kind of coaching at that level. They just said, here, go and try to figure this out. How many agile classes, leadership classes, have you ever heard about for some of these, you know, leaders? They don't go through it. And they're supposed to somehow figure it out.
Getting back on the track and getting back to Art's chart. So management decided we're going to pivot from a pure waterfall to a hybrid waterfall agile. Olga said, well, you know, it takes us at the bottom saying that things need to get better for us to change. So if fear, as Olga said, is the motivating factor for staying on the circular track, does that mean that the people at the bottom need to start a movement to get the management at the middle layer to shift? Is that what Olga was suggesting?
No, I think that what the question was initially was, you know, why do people stay in that circular track? And when I said fear, I mean fear of moving from one area to, you know, from especially now, because everything's, you know, you just don't know if you're going to have a job tomorrow or not. Because, you know, if you quit, then, you know, you might want to kill yourself but then again, if you quit, you may be, you know, you may be holding yourself back. I think it's just fear of the unknown, really, that why people stay in that circular track. But also, you know, I'm very hopeful that things will change. And maybe that's just the naive person in me that, you know, I'm extremely hopeful that things will change, especially with, you know, people that are coaching us like Rick and Regina. So, you know, they're our transformation experts. So, you know, they've done a great job. It's just now when they hand it back to the management, it's getting them to continue pushing and striving forward, right? So I think that's the fear that I was talking about.
Okay. And you're kind of blessed because you have the experience and the work that Rick and Regina has put in.
Mm-hmm.
But Rick and Regina do not, got to work on that English. Rick and Regina do not work at every company.
Right.
So where the Rick and Reginas and Arts and Marcelo of the worlds are not guiding people, what does it take for those companies to get off the circular track?
But can I say something, Marcelo? It's
Yeah,
fun-
absolutely. Go for it, and then I'm going to bring up my totem. Go for it.
It is funny because now it's been like 4 years since Regina and Rick been there. It looks like we want, like where she's coming from, is like they want to be agile, but they're wearing like a waterfall, and they're trying to combine, just like Art say, wagile.
Yeah, I call it fragile myself.
Whack-a-jaw. And then it would drive you crazy. It's supposed to be, you don't know where you're supposed to be in there, and it's frustrating. And I feel your pain, Olga.
I know you do, darling. Joanne used to work with me.
Yeah, I'm gonna share with you an observation that Rick's probably gonna get upset at me, because it's kind of like the secret sauce. Okay. Okay. And the word you see, he's already, I haven't said a thing and he's already upset. Okay. He's already upset. So one word. It's not mutiny for the folks that posted it. I love that word, but it's not mutiny. It's called feedback. Okay. And Michael hit on the head. It's how it's presented. Okay. It's how it's presented. But consistent presented feedback, okay, is what makes the difference. Okay. And the secret sauce of transformation experts, Olga, just so you understand, is not that we're the transformation experts. It's that the mission of transformation experts is to make you transformation experts.
Mm-hmm.
Experts in your own transformation, and to help empower you guys to own your own transformations. Okay?
I've heard that before.
Okay. Oh, so he told you, so he's getting upset at me for no reason at all whatsoever. See,
He didn't put it so eloquently, but yeah.
see, you know, that's how it is. So, and Saba, wonderful, consistent, presented feedback. I'm going to throw one more word at you. Persistent. Don't give up. Persistent feedback. Respectful, but persistent feedback.
But to answer Reynaldo's question, it takes people to speak up. So you have to not only be consistent and persistent, but you have to also make sure you do speak up, because it's not worth being consistent or persistent if it's just the few. It has to be the whole team as one, presenting that consistent feedback in a way that delivers the message and makes sure that people go back to that transformation and not to going back to what they knew.
Marcelo, March 3rd
Absolutely.
change. March 3rd change. You were the presenter. The theme of that was, if I remember correctly, what Omar just said.
Mm-hmm.
Change needs to
Begin with
you.
All on you. It's all connected, folks. Waterfall, agile, it's all you.
But you need a safe space, or you need the person who you're giving that information to want it, to do something with it, right?
Correct. So the food folks have put in the chat this concept of psychological safety, and that was also part of the subject that I spoke about on March 3rd. And to that point, I'm still working on someone who is more of an expert on psychological safety. Hopefully I can bring that person to us sometime early summer.
Cool.
Hopefully. We'll see.
So clearly me walking away for 2 seconds was very effective.
You planned it all along, didn't you?
Well, that was the idea, because while I was presenting, so everybody was looking to me for answers. If I walk away for a minute, then you can go look to each other for answers. So I like that. Hey, I'll reiterate what Marcelo said. Saturday morning, this is the kind of conversation we have on Saturday mornings.
All right.
So feel free to join us. Rick, do you have